So we're going to look at smoking and performance, and particularly how smoking affects the cardiovascular system. So obviously it can affect the respiratory system and lots of other elements of health, but we're specifically going to look at the cardiovascular system within this video. So the cardiovascular system is essentially about supplying our muscles with oxygen to allow us to perform and transporting that oxygen in the blood. So we're going to look at the effect of smoking on the blood vessels and also how smoking affects our ability to transport oxygen. So looking firstly at the blood vessels. Now, we know that arteries and arterioles have a muscular wall, an elasticated wall that allow them to expand and recoil. But actually smoking affects the walls of these arteries and arterioles and will actually damage the lining, and we've got this plaque build-up which contributes to reducing the size of the lumen, the space in the middle of our blood vessels that blood travels through, but also to hardening those arteries and arterial walls. And if they are hardened, then they don't expand and recoil particularly well. And if they're blocked by those atherosclerotic plaques, then we don't have blood flowing through them particularly well. So in both cases, smoking can affect the walls and the diameter, the lumen of the blood vessels, particularly the arteries and arterioles, negatively, such that we can't transport blood and therefore oxygen around our body as well as we'd hope to. If we look specifically at oxygen, then what we should know already at this point is that oxygen is carried in the blood by hemoglobin, which we find in red blood cells. So oxygen, 4 pairs of oxygen will attach to a hemoglobin and it becomes oxyhemoglobin, and that travels around in the blood and it reaches the muscle cells. The oxygen dissociates, so is released from the hemoglobin and goes off to be used by mitochondria around our slow twitch fibers. So we make energy aerobic by using that oxygen which has been delivered to our muscles by the hemoglobin in the blood. Now, smoking, in relation to this, our ability to transport oxygen, it's all to do with carbon monoxide. Now, carbon monoxide is something that you take in when you smoke, and actually it's incredibly serious in terms of your health, because it's effectively poisoning you if it builds up and builds up and builds up. Sometimes we know about carbon monoxide leaks from gas appliances in people's homes, and they basically die from carbon monoxide poisoning. So it can significantly affect your ability to live, to exist, to use oxygen. Obviously in smaller amounts, as you might have when you smoke, it can affect your health, but it can also affect your aerobic capacity, your ability to use oxygen in the form of exercise. So this here is a carbon monoxide atom. Now, the big deal about carbon monoxide is that it competes with oxygen to attach to hemoglobin. So we said previously, we know that oxygen normally attaches to hemoglobin and is carried around in the blood. But carbon monoxide is better at attaching, or has a higher affinity for hemoglobin. So hemoglobin, given the choice of letting oxygen or carbon monoxide attach to it, will choose carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide, there is a higher affinity between carbon monoxide and hemoglobin than there is between oxygen and hemoglobin. So if you smoke, you will have carbon monoxide in your blood, and that carbon monoxide will take priority attaching to the hemoglobin, which means that the oxygen cannot. And obviously the implications for that are, if you can't attach oxygen, you won't be able to circulate as much oxygen in the blood. And as you can see there, it says carbon dioxide binds with hemoglobin hundreds of times tighter than oxygen. So it really does sort of latch on and dominate. So we really don't want carbon monoxide present in our blood, and if you smoke, you have it. You basically reduce significantly your chances of oxygen attaching to hemoglobin and travelling around in your blood. So the more carbon dioxide you have, the less oxygen or the less oxyhemoglobin you'll have at the lungs, and obviously less oxygen will be traveling around, and you'll end up with less being provided for the muscles, so less being in the blood and dissociating at the muscles for the muscles to use. So carbon dioxide as an outcome of smoking is bad because we basically have less that attaches to hemoglobin at the lungs, and therefore in the blood traveling to the muscles we'll have less that can be released to the muscles. So let's kind of summarize. Less oxygen in the blood as a result of smoking. We need to therefore have a higher heart rate. So that's a strain. If we're not able to transport as much oxygen because it's clogged up with carbon monoxide, heart rate has got to be elevated to cope, to compensate. We will ultimately have higher blood pressure as a result of a higher cardiac output and heart rate. We know we end up with less oxyhemoglobin. We have less oxygen getting to the muscles, therefore we can do less, or we can make less aerobic energy, so we can't use oxygen as much to make energy. If we can't work as aerobically, then we probably have to work anaerobically, and we know that with anaerobic work we have things like lactic acid, which is fatiguing. And also, if we can't work aerobically as well, our VO2 max would lower, possibly by up to about 10%. So typically, smokers would have a lower VO2 max, and that means you have less potential to use oxygen in your muscles per minute to make energy. So you won't work as aerobically well. So some stats then. The prevalence of smoking, cigarette smoking by sex between 1974 and 2012 in Great Britain, men and women. And you can see actually we've got a lower percentage through the years of people smoking, but we still got a fifth of men smoking. So nearly a quarter of men smoking. We've got a fifth of women smoking. That's still quite a significant volume of people, even in 2012. Percentage of pupils aged 15 who are regular smokers, who smoke at least one cigarette a week on average. So again, we can see that numbers have dropped for both girls and boys, but we're still looking at about 10% of girls and boys aged 15 being regular smokers, and that's particularly worrying statistics. So these came from Action on Smoke and Health in 2014. So adults are about 10 million adult smokers, 22% of adult men and 90% of adult women. I suggest you pause the video and have a little look at those. It's actually quite sort of interesting data there. Contextually, we've got young people. 2/3 of smokers start before age 18. How critical is that we teach our young people to have balanced, active, healthy lifestyles, which means not smoking. So even though it's illegal to sell people under age of 18, we still have 2/3 of smokers being under the legal limit. 60% of smokers say they would find it hard to last a whole day without smoking. Again, 60%, a frightening figure. Tobacco smoke contains over 4,000 chemical compounds present, either gases or tiny particles. These include carbon monoxide. Well, we already know that's rubbish for us, even if we're looking in terms of health, let alone in terms of aerobic performance in sport. Arsenic, these are poisons: arsenic, formaldehyde, cyanide, horrendous stuff. And deaths. About half of all regular cigarette smokers will eventually be killed by their addiction. Again, incredibly frightening figures, but have a little closer look at those. So lastly, just before I show you a little video, here's a graph which looks at the chances of you developing lung cancer, whether you're a non or former or a current smoker. And clearly here's evidence that current smokers are much more likely to develop lung cancer. There's an accepted connection between the two things, particularly if you're male. If you have smoked previously and you've given up, there's a lesser chance. And obviously, if you're a non-smoker, then there's less chance again, although it is still possible for you to develop lung cancer as a non-smoker. But again, you've reduced your chances quite dramatically. So let's just look at a video and give us a little bit more information about smoking and the effect it has on our body.
If you're a smoker, the effects of tobacco spread to literally every part of your body. Let's take a closer look. A mere 3 seconds after the first puff of a cigarette, the 4,000 chemicals in the smoke make your eyes water and nose run. They also irritate the throat, causing the infamous smoker's cough. And continued exposure to smoking thickens the throat's membranes, resulting in cellular changes that can lead to throat cancer. Smoking's biggest impact, though, can be seen and felt in the lungs. In fact, 90% of lung cancer deaths are due to smoking. Why? Smoking 1 pack of cigarettes a day for a year has a similar impact to pouring a full cup of tar down your lungs, tar that is rich in cancer-causing chemicals. Smoking also increases the amount of mucus the body produces, and mucus serves as the breeding ground for bacteria and viruses. So, a smoker is more likely to come down with a cold, the flu, and bronchitis. Worse still, smokers have a harder time fighting these infections because their white blood cells are too impaired to resist invading organisms. Smoking is hard on the heart too. Smokers' hearts beat an extra 10 to 25 times per minute, increasing the risk of heart attacks. Smoking can also cause up to a 15% increase in the risk of having a potentially deadly heart attack and stroke. Carbon monoxide is a deadly gas present in car exhaust. It's also present in cigarette smoke. This chemical leads to decreased oxygen in the brain, the skin, and other organs. The results can be slowed comprehension, wrinkled grayish skin, and significantly reduced energy.